What's up everybody, it's Izzy, and the topic that I want to address in today's video is a question that I get pretty frequently, and that is, should I do steroids? I get emails from people wondering if they should go down that path. Now, I want to of course say that I'm not a doctor, this is not medical advice, this video is purely for entertainment and informational purposes, and I don't claim to have all the answers on this, but I do think I have a unique perspective because after watching a lot of videos on the internet throughout the years of being involved in the fitness community, I feel like I'm one of the only people that I've seen that has done one cycle, didn't like it, and then never went back. So far too often what you get when you talk about this topic is people that are just like caricatures because they're so far to the left or the right of the issue. Like, you know, you have the stereotypical drugs are bad, you should never do drugs person. And then on the other hand, you have like the person who's been using steroids for years. It's like, yeah, dude, steroids are awesome. I never had any side effects. You just get big and jacked. There's no problems, you know. And the reality of the situation is obviously always somewhere in the middle on these types of issues. So the first thing that I want to address is competitive lifting, competitive athletics. Well, no, specifically competitive lifting, and because that's where most of you guys are coming from here. And more often than not, I think that people haven't thought this all the way through when they think that they want to get on cycle for lifting. Okay, if you're getting on cycle for virtually any other reason, whether it is a medically diagnosed condition that requires it, so like you want to go on testosterone replacement therapy because you have multiple lab reports showing low testosterone levels, that's one thing. If you're the person who is into like the party lifestyle, or you're just a business person who wants to get into better shape with a lot less effort and have like, you know, an elite top 1% body compared to the rest of the population, that's one story. But when we're talking about competitive powerlifting, it forces you into this dichotomy of all or nothing. Because there's no federation that I know of that says this is the group that only uses 1 gram of gear or less. Here's the group for 2 grams or less. It's either you use or you don't use. And people don't take this seriously enough because the bottom line, no matter what anybody tells you about how important drugs are or how important drugs aren't, is that only the craziest genetics imaginable can compete with people who are using drugs, and especially the people who are using these enormous amounts. And if you're not willing to do that, you're not going to be able to compete. And the problem with that is that if you're doing this to be competitive, you almost are forcing yourself into a situation where you use all of them instead of a reasonable approach that's monitored by doctors. It's chemical warfare. If you're not willing to do as much as the next guy, it's putting you at a huge disadvantage, particularly due to the fact that, you know, these people that are willing to use more are going to be able to be much heavier than you, have much more muscle than you, despite being the same height. And if you're familiar at all with my work on powerlifting nutrition, you know just how important it is to be the shortest, most jacked person in your weight class. And this is a particularly big problem for females, especially in the higher weight classes, because steroids, in many of them, especially, but a lot of it's dose dependent as well, can cause permanent virilization, which is basically females can become masculinized. So it's like you have facial hair, body hair, deepening of the voice, widening of the jaw, enlarging of the head, the clitoris can grow, all of these things, and they're irreversible. You can't take it back. And similarly, even for males, especially younger males that don't consider this, under the age of 25, you're not fully done developing yet. Your endocrine system and your neurological, the entire thing, it's not done yet. And you can heavily disrupt this with some of these drugs that are extremely powerful. And the effects of you doing this are irreversible. You're not going to be able to take this stuff back. So again, I mean, if you're trying to convince yourself that you're doing this because you want to be a competitive powerlifter at the top of the game, you want to compete with the best of the best, I would really challenge you to think about that more logically and see if you weren't just being impulsive and see if you just don't want to see what it's like. Because oftentimes when I really challenge people on this, they find that they're not doing this for competitive reasons at all. They just want to try it because they want to be big and jacked and strong. And that's totally fine, but you need to be aware of what your actual motivations are. Because the reality of the situation is the biggest powerlifting federation in the world is the International Powerlifting Federation. It's the IPF. It has the most competitors and it has the highest degree of competition. There's no other federation that comes anywhere near the IPF as far as, again, member count and the level of competitiveness at big events. So if you're doing this because you want to seek out people who are the best of the best, it's actually kind of an anti-competitive practice to start using drugs, because now you're going to go into this whole world of enhanced powerlifting where it's splintered. There's 1,000 different federations. There's a few big meets per year where a lot of the top guys go, but not all of them. And they're run by different organizations. You have things like Big Dogs, and in the past of like Raw Unity. And there's just these big one-time events that happen each year where a lot of people go, but not all the top guys go. So you're actually making things less competitive when you make this decision. So if you're thinking about doing this because you want to be, a competitive powerlifter, just make sure you realize what you're getting yourself into. There is no moderation with competitive sport. If that's your goal, you're going to have to be willing to do the multiple grams per week of drugs eventually. And we know that if you go down that path, it's almost like signing away a decade or two off of your life. So decide if that's something that you want. And likewise, for females, it's pretty much a guarantee, depending on the drugs that you use, how long you use them, and then the doses, that you will have these viralization effects. So again, are you willing to accept that? Because I get questions, just as many questions from female competitors asking if they should do a small cycle of Anavar as I do from male lifters who want to get on their first cycle of test and D-ball. Really understand what you're doing. If you're a recreational lifter, I think that the equation changes a lot, and this is where people spew out a lot of BS. There are certainly dangers to steroid use. Nobody should try to trivialize or minimize that. I mean, all sorts of things can happen. Gynecomastia, which is breast tissue growth. Males can actually have breast tissue growth from their hormones coming out of balance, particularly estrogen, and this is only reversible through surgery. Other things that can happen, erectile dysfunction. Nobody talks about that, but that can also happen. And let's see, what else? Fertility loss. Now, again, one of the problems with steroid research is that there's so little of it due to the ethics situation. Like, you can't give somebody potentially harmful things for a very long period of time and just to see what happens. Ethics boards want to prove that. So there have been anecdotal reports on the internet of people having permanent fertility loss. I don't know if that's ever been recorded in a serious journal, but again, the lack of research in the first place causes people to seek out anecdotes from their gym buddies anyway. So if you're going to take into account all the good anecdotes from the people that have had good experiences at the gym, you should probably listen to those that had bad experience as well. And this is one of the biggest problems, is that you never hear from these people. Think about it. If you had a bad experience, would you be posting on steroid boards years later? If you had a bad experience with cycling, do you think you'd still be going to the gym, hanging out at hardcore powerlifting gyms? No, there's a selection bias here. People that didn't have side effects, it didn't really damage their life in any serious way, so they kept doing it, or they enjoyed the rewards enough to overcome the negative. So a huge selection bias is going on there when you ask your lifting buddies about what you should do. Now, all of that said, I think it's absolutely ridiculous when people say that there are no immediate benefits to proper use of steroids, even for recreational lifters. Like, people will love to claim that steroids don't do anything unless you go to the gym. But there's studies that show that people who have a mean level total testosterone in the 500 to 550 range, if you give them 300, 600 milligrams per week, they'll gain muscle literally not even working out. And actually, the study that I'm referencing, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, there was 4 groups, and I don't want to break it down too much, but anyway, let's just say that one group took steroids and didn't work out, and another group didn't take steroids and did work out, and their muscle growth rates were roughly equivalent. So it absolutely is a complete hack, and it does make a huge difference. So if you're somebody who's doing this for recreational purposes, who isn't going to go off of the deep end and permanently damage your internal organs and risk serious life-changing, irreversible side effects because you want to be a competitive powerlifter, then a more reasonable discussion can be had, because most of the common side effects are manageable, and it seems extremely rare when using small to moderate doses to have permanent irreversible side effects. And the bottom line is is that it is 10,000 times easier to have, let's say, a top 1% physique compared to the rest of the population on small doses of performance-enhancing drugs versus doing it completely naturally. And this is very relevant for, say, people who want their main focus in life to be business or family, but they still want to have a really great physique. The chances of you being able to do this on low to moderate doses with very minimal side effects are extremely high. So anyway, in either case, I would encourage you to do your research, to do as much research as possible, because the number one thing that I've seen over the years is that people just refuse to do this the right way. I've had people come to me for advice, and I even used to give them like a full, detailed step-by-step plan of what they should do. Get initial blood work before you do anything. Like have everything on hand before you start. Get blood work in the middle of the cycle. Get blood work after the cycle to confirm that you have recovered. There's a whole host of things that you really need to do if you're going to be responsible about this. People don't do any of it. And that's why I know that when you tell me that your reason for wanting to get on is to be a competitive powerlifter, 99% of the time, I know that's complete bullshit. You're just being an impulsive kid, 90% of the time, maybe more. And you haven't thought this through all the way, and you just want to act and get it done as quickly as possible. And that's why people don't do all the research that they should do. They don't take all the necessary precautions, and the motivation that they're telling themselves is usually bullshit in the first place. Because if you were really that concerned about competitive powerlifting, you would be focusing on climbing up the ranks in the IPF. Whereas for now, which as of now, there's actually higher rewards for the top IPF lifters than there is for the top enhanced lifters. The US Open notwithstanding, but if you're talking about building a social media following, being able to start a coaching business, selling products, the natural community, I'm pulling this completely out of my ass, but I would estimate, it's anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4 times bigger than the enhanced lifting community. And so the marketplace there is bigger, the potential customer base there is bigger. So if you're doing this because you want powerlifting to be your living, I don't even think it makes sense to be enhanced nowadays. Anyways, that was an extremely long video, but I hope you guys found it informative. My whole point with this that I want to sum up very quickly is especially for the younger audience that's listening to this, because if you're older, you usually don't fall for the traps and mistakes that I listed throughout this whole video. But for the younger people, really make sure that you're not considering this from an impulsive place or a place of insecurity. If you're telling yourself it's because you want to be a competitive powerlifter, you better understand that you better make sure that you understand what that really means in terms of how much shit that you're going to have to use, how horrible it's going to make you feel from the blood pressure and the side effects and the mood swings, the amount of food that you're going to have to eat, the sleepless, sweaty nights, all of those things. Make sure that you've actually done your research and talk to people who will be honest with you about the negative consequences of their decisions, and not just the gym bro who's like, yeah bro, it's fucking awesome, I went from a 500 deadlift to an 800 deadlift in 3 years. Like, you need to get a balanced take on these things. And for the people that are doing this for recreational purposes, I really think that you should ignore a lot of the fitness community on this topic, because they're just so jaded by this dichotomy of either enhanced or drug-free and being a competitor in one or the other. Whereas you can get a ton of benefits in your life from a time efficiency standpoint with minimal risk if you educate yourself fully on the topic and only use small to moderate doses. Especially for those of you that have quote-unquote bad genetics, this can make just all the difference in the world. It could go from fitness being a completely pointless endeavor for you. Like I mean, that's kind of a rude thing to say, but obviously because there's always self-improvement that goes on. But I know people that have been working out for 2 or 3 years that are smaller and can't lift as much weight as people that I've seen who have been lifting for 2 months. And if you're doing this to look good and have the social benefits of a great physique, why are you wasting your time with these more inefficient approaches? But again, that's not a recommendation. You need to make sure that you're aware of all the possible side effects, that you've done all the research, and do everything by the book. Do not do this impulsively. I mean, if you haven't been planning for this for at least 6 months, if you don't have all the steps laid out, it's probably just because you're young and impulsive and you're about to rush into a decision that you will regret. And the reason why I can speak on that so confidently is because that is exactly what I did. I told myself all that same bullshit. I was like, oh, I wanted to be a competitive powerlifter. I want to be a powerlifting legend someday. But in reality, I just want to see what steroids did. I was insecure about my strength, about my physique, and I opted for the easy improvement without doing all my research first. I trusted kind of like the local big guy at the gym. Horrible mistake. But yeah, these are the things that can happen. And again, just make sure that you know what you're getting into and what you want out of it. And I assure you that the whole process will go a lot better. Anyways, hope you guys found that an interesting and nuanced and different take than most people have on the topic. And as always, if you have questions, leave them down below or shoot me an email. You can find links to do that in the description box. And as one last thing, I'm going to include the best book that I've ever found on steroid education in the description box as well, Anabolics by William Llewellyn. Anyways, as always, my friends, have a nice day. Peace.